The Ferrari in the ashes. The morning Daniel Reyes found out his daughter needed a second surgery, he had exactly $47 in his checking account and a transmission job he hadn't been paid for yet. He stood in the fluorescent light of the hospital corridor, holding his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white, listening to numbers that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. $60,000. Minimum. And that was just the beginning. He didn't cry. Men like Daniel, men who had been raising a 9-year-old girl alone since her mother walked out, men who worked 6 days a week in a garage that smelled of oil and burned rubber, men who packed school lunches at 5 in the morning and still showed up to every single dance recital, men like Daniel didn't have the luxury of crying. They just kept moving. Because the moment you stopped, everything you were holding up came crashing down. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that find ordinary people in their darkest moments, like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. This community was built for stories exactly like this one. Daniel had heard about the Ferrari the way most impossible things arrive in small towns, through a rumor passed between customers. Someone mentioned that Elena Marchetti, the CEO of a Naples real estate development firm, was clearing out her late grandfather's estate on the edge of the bay. The old man had been a collector, a romantic about machinery, and somewhere deep in a locked garage behind the main house sat the ruin of something that used to be beautiful. A 1961 Ferrari 250 GT, burned in a fire that had swept through the garage a decade ago. It had been sitting untouched ever since, a blackened skeleton of chrome and melted paint, half covered by a tarp that had long since fused to the scorched hood. Daniel drove out on a Tuesday evening after dropping his son Marcus at his sister's apartment. Marcus was 12 and far too observant for his age, the kind of boy who noticed when his father's hands shook slightly while pouring coffee, who left hand-drawn cards on the kitchen table that said things like "You're the strongest guy I know, Dad." Daniel had folded the latest one and kept it in his shirt pocket, the paper soft from being unfolded and refolded too many times. Elena Marchetti was not what he expected. She was poised and polished in the effortless way of people who have never had to count the cost of anything, dressed in cream linen even on a warm weekday evening, standing at the edge of her grandfather's property like she was already somewhere else in her mind. She showed him the car with the detachment of someone selling old furniture. The garage doors rolled open and Daniel stepped inside, and even in its ruined state, even blackened and hollow and stripped of everything that had once made it sing, the car took his breath away. He could see what it had been. He could see the bones of something extraordinary underneath all that sorrow. Elena told him $500, cash, and he could haul it away himself. She said it almost apologetically, like she was embarrassed to be charging anything at all for something so obviously destroyed. And then she laughed softly and said something that would echo in Daniel's mind for the rest of his life, that if he found anything valuable buried in that wreckage, anything at all, he was welcome to keep every single penny of it. She meant it as a joke. The kind of thing you say when you're certain there's nothing left to find. Daniel paid her in cash he'd borrowed from his sister. He rented a flatbed trailer and called in a favor from a friend to help him load it. The car arrived at his garage at 2 in the morning and he stood looking at it under the work lights for a long time before he went home to sleep. He spent the next 10 days doing what he had always done with broken things, he paid attention. He didn't rush. He didn't tear into it carelessly. He moved through the burned shell with the same patience he used when he was listening to an engine that was trying to tell him what was wrong. He pulled back layers of fire damage with gloved hands, cataloging everything, photographing each piece. Most of it was exactly what it looked like, loss. But on the 7th day, working on the destroyed door panel on the passenger side, Daniel found something that didn't belong to the fire. Sealed inside the original interior cavity, wrapped in what had once been an oilcloth pouch now fused and blackened, were documents. Restoration records. Build sheets. Racing provenance papers. And a small leather journal written in Italian, filled with the handwriting of Elena's grandfather, describing the car's history in meticulous detail, including the name of every owner it had passed through before he acquired it in 1974. Daniel photographed everything and sent the images to an automotive historian he found through an online forum, half expecting nothing. What came back changed the temperature of the room. The car had a racing history that placed it at multiple Targa Florio events in the early 1960s. It had been driven by a name that meant almost nothing to Daniel but apparently meant everything to a very specific and very wealthy class of collectors worldwide. The historian's response was 3 sentences long and ended with, "Please do not do anything with this car until you speak with a professional. This is not a normal vehicle." On the 10th day, Daniel received a phone call from a man who introduced himself as a representative of a private collector. He spoke in carefully measured English with an accent Daniel couldn't quite place. He said his client had become aware of the vehicle's documentation through the historian's network and wished to make an offer for the car as is, provenance included. He named a number that Daniel initially thought he had misheard. He asked the man to repeat it. $14 million, the man said again, wire transfer within 48 hours, with a team dispatched immediately to evaluate and transport. Daniel sat down on the concrete floor of his garage and pressed his back against the cold wall and stayed there for a very long time. Above him, the burned Ferrari sat under the work lights, still ruined, still hollow, still holding the quiet secret it had kept for over a decade while the world walked past it and saw only wreckage. He called Elena Marchetti the following morning. He told her everything clearly and without embellishment, the same way he did everything. She was silent for so long he thought the call had dropped. Then she said, very quietly, that she didn't want a single dollar of it. That her grandfather would have wanted it to go to someone who had seen the car for what it truly was. That she was sorry she hadn't looked harder herself. Her voice, by the end of that call, was not the voice of the woman in the cream linen. It was something softer and more human, the voice of someone being reminded that the world still occasionally does something worth believing in. The wire cleared 2 days later. Daniel paid for his daughter Sophia's surgery in full. He set aside an education fund for Marcus. He kept his garage. He kept his hours. He kept packing school lunches at 5 in the morning, because some things you hold on to not because you have to, but because they are the truest parts of who you are. The burned Ferrari was restored over 3 years by specialists in Medina and now sits in a climate-controlled room in the Brunei Royal Collection, the most ordinary extraordinary thing in the world, a ruin that someone decided was still worth saving. Drop a comment below and tell us, what is one broken thing in your life that you haven't given up on yet? Your answer might be exactly what someone else needed to read today. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that value is often buried beneath damage, and that patience and kindness still lead somewhere, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Every story we tell exists because of the people who stayed.